The global energy sector, it's more than just oil rigs and power plants. It's a financial giant moving trillions of dollars all over the planet. But what if a big chunk of that industry was actually being used to power something? Well, something much darker. Today, we are digging into a new academic analysis that pulls back the curtain on how this vital sector is being used to launder billions in dirty money. So, how in the world do they get away with it? Well, before we dive into the how, we've got to understand the why. What makes the energy sector such a perfect playground for these massive criminal operations? Okay, brace yourself for this number. The United Nations estimates that up to 1.87 trillion euros are laundered across the globe every single year. I mean, that's a number so huge, it's almost meaningless, right? To put it in perspective, that's up to 5% of the entire world's economic output. A huge slice of that dirty cash needs to be cleaned, and that's exactly where this story really gets started. And that brings us right to the heart of the matter. How are these criminal groups actually pulling it off? How are they exploiting an industry that is so critical to all of us? Let's break it down. This right here, this is the core of the why. You've got these gigantic, swirling pools of money moving around, which makes it super easy to hide huge transactions. And then you have these incredibly complex global supply chains and these like Russian doll-style ownership structures. It's a system that, if you're not watching it like a hawk, becomes the perfect place to hide a whole lot of illegal money. So how do they actually take advantage of these weaknesses? Well, it's not by accident. Criminals have a very specific set of tools they use, kind of like a money launderer's toolkit, to make their dirty money look perfectly clean. First up, you've got the classic tool, shell companies. Seriously, think of these as financial nesting dolls. They're basically fake companies that only exist on paper, usually in some offshore tax haven. Criminals can set up a whole chain of them, bouncing money from one to the next until the original source is totally lost. And then you have false invoicing. This one is so simple, it's brilliant. Just imagine a criminal group sending a multi-million-dollar bill to an energy company for, say, geological consulting services that, you guessed it, never actually happened. The company pays the invoice, and just like that, that dirty money now has a perfectly legitimate-looking paper trail. And finally, we've got the intermediaries. These are the shadowy figures in the middle, right? The agents, the consultants, the people who broker the deals. They act as a buffer, adding yet another layer of complexity that makes it next to impossible for law enforcement to connect the money back to the actual criminals. So, all these tools are used in a pretty standard three-step process. First comes placement. That's just getting the dirty cash into the system. Then comes the really clever part. Layering. This is where the shell companies and fake invoices go to work. The whole goal is to scramble the trail. It's kind of like scrambling an egg. Once you mix it all up, there's no way to separate the yolk from the white again. And finally, you have integration, where that now clean money is used to buy up legit assets, like refineries or even power plants. And believe me, this isn't just theory. These exact methods have been used in some of the biggest financial scandals we've seen in recent years. So let's crack open the case files and look at some real-world examples. Wow, this slide really shows you just how widespread this problem is. We're talking Brazil with the huge Petrobras scandal where $2 billion were laundered using false invoicing. We see it in Mexico, in Nigeria, and yep, even in Canada. It's the same playbook being used again and again, and the result is just billions and billions of dollars getting siphoned away. When you analyze all these different cases, it really boils down to this one crucial point. The common thread, the thing you see in almost every single one of these scandals, is the use of shell companies and intermediaries. It just hammers home how incredibly important it is to have strong, consistent regulatory oversight. Okay, so we've seen the problem, and it's a big one. But what's the solution? Well, this research doesn't just point fingers, it actually offers a detailed plan for how to fight back. Let's check that out. So the proposed defense is built on these 8 key pillars. It's a really holistic approach, right? It covers everything from proactively assessing your risks and having solid internal policies, to better training for employees, doing thorough due diligence on who you're doing business with, and actively monitoring transactions. It's all about building a defense with multiple layers. And here is where this research gets really, really practical. This isn't just a list of good ideas. The researchers have actually turned this entire framework into a scorecard that countries can use to grade their own defenses against money laundering. And what's really interesting is that not all parts of this framework are weighted equally. Look at this. Risk assessment is the absolute heavyweight, making up almost a quarter of the entire score. What that tells you is that the single most important first step is simply understanding where your biggest weaknesses are. So, what does that look like in the real world? Well, the difference is pretty dramatic. A country with really poor enforcement might get a score of, say, 3.7 out of 10. But a country with a strong, effective system could be looking at a score closer to 7.8. This scorecard just lays bare the massive gap between having rules on the books and actually enforcing them. And really, that's the bottom line here. This research isn't just academic theory. It's about taking the tough lessons learned from billion-dollar crimes and turning them into a practical, actionable tool that can help regulators all over the world build much stronger defenses. Which leaves us with one final, pretty fascinating question to think about. As the good guys build better defenses, the criminals just adapt. So will new technologies like AI and blockchain be our ultimate weapon in this fight? Or will they just become the next fancy tools in the money launderer's toolkit? It seems the game of cat and mouse is far from over.